Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alan Arthur, Aeon's president and CEO. Thanks very much for joining us here today. So this is an opportunity for me to share what your support makes possible, especially as it relates to saving existing affordable homes in our community. If you have any questions for me throughout the webinar, you can ask them in the panel on the right side of your screen. I will try to get to them during the Q&A period. Thanks. Also, if you sent questions in advance, I'll do my best to get through those as well. For any questions I can't answer during the webinar today, someone from our team will follow up with you to share my response. Today, we'll be talking about an urgent aspect of the affordable housing crisis in our communities and how you are helping by supporting Aeon. You know, I've been doing this work for almost 50 years, and I can honestly say we are facing the toughest challenges today. As a matter of fact, I think we're facing what's going to be the next 2 decades of the toughest time for housing for lower income people since the Great Depression in the 1930s. In the Twin Cities, we are losing affordable homes faster than we can build them. How is that possible? Well, first, the federal government has been backing away from housing our lowest income families for more than 30 years. They've invested less and less in relative terms in Section 8 and public housing. And at the same time, the US population has grown from 240 million people in the mid 80s to about 315 million people. Secondly, there's an expiration date on many affordable homes. Developers get tax breaks for including affordable homes in their properties, but those requirements expire after 15 or 20 or sometimes 30 years. We're losing the affordability of many of those homes. Third, wages are not keeping up with rising rents. Median renter income went down by 5% since 2000, and the lowest incomes went down by almost 15%. Meanwhile, the wage needed to afford the average rent in Minnesota went up by 9% in the past decade. It's going to get worse. Over the next decade, the top 5 jobs with the most projected growth in Minnesota all earn less than $15 an hour. As a matter of fact, almost half the jobs we create are at wages that would qualify people for affordable housing. At these pay levels, a person would have to work 80 hours per week to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Almost half the jobs we create are at those really, really low incomes. And finally, there's the issue we're going to focus on today, naturally occurring affordable housing, often referred to as NOAH, N-O-A-H. NOAH properties are apartment buildings that have aged into affordability. So they're 50, 60 years old and they're outdated, so they aren't as appealing to higher income renters, and they need work. They need recapitalization. Well, right now, with this hot real estate market that we're facing here, and for that matter, across the United States, these NOAH properties are getting bought by investors and upgraded. They spruce them up and raise rents by $200, $300, sometimes $500 and $600 a month. The residents of NOAH properties are mostly on fixed incomes or work minimum wage jobs or slightly above minimum wage jobs. There are parking attendants, coffee shop baristas, retired teachers, living on a small pension. They wait tables, clean office buildings, and work as nurses' aides. Many already pay rent equal to half their income or more. A $300 rent increase forces them out of their home. I know a retiree who was forced out of her home when it was bought and upscaled, only to be forced out of another property less than a year later. NOAH losses have a ripple effect on communities. Some of you may remember this story of the property in Richfield that was sold and upscaled. As a result, 38 families in the city of Richfield became homeless. And by the way, I don't think that's the only folks who became homeless. That's the folks who were able to stay in the city of Richfield. With fewer students enrolled because of the homelessness and the moving of all the families from that property, the local school district was forced to lay off dozens of staff. As a community, what do we say to those children who became homeless because of a real estate transaction? Without a home, how can a person maintain the stability of work or school? There is no homework without home. How can seniors manage their health or maintain any quality of life facing this kind of stress? How can a family plan for their future or develop connections in their community? My guess is that we're still losing upwards of 75 to 100 no apartment homes per week in the Twin Cities. Per week. The window to keep them affordable is closing. Soon, the prices for these properties will be driven up so high that Aeon won't be able to keep them affordable. The NOAA window has already closed for Seattle and Portland. Now they're faced with tent cities overflowing with growing numbers of homeless people. We can't let the Twin Cities follow that same path. And that is why, a few years ago, Aeon decided to jump in with both feet to save NOAA homes. Your support as a donor helps Aeon lead the effort to save existing affordable homes. Like I showed earlier, more than 9,000 homes in our community have been lost since 2010. But through Aeon, you saved 3,000 homes from the same fate since 2016. Buying and fixing up these NOAA properties is the most cost-effective and fastest way to keep families from losing their homes. Aeon has always and will continue to build new affordable homes, but we need to tackle the problem from every angle to have an impact on the affordable housing crisis. That's why we're buying and renovating existing homes, plus building new homes. We think this is the best strategy to increase the availability of affordable homes as quickly as possible. Since Aeon began preserving NOAA properties, we've learned some important lessons. First, we need to expand our capacity. The growth of our portfolio also requires growth in staff and technology systems. NOAA properties come with a lot of challenges. Often they've been underinvested for many, many years. They need physical improvements to make them places people are proud to call home. But the resources to fix up these properties are hard to come by. There are systems and funding tools we use to purchase or build affordable buildings, but to improve rundown buildings, there's no smooth system that's been developed to find the money for that. And that's the investment these properties and the families living in them desperately need. Residents in NOAA properties often spend half their income on rent. They're stretched thin and they're forced to make difficult decisions every day, like choosing between medicine and food. It's important to connect them with resources to make sure they can keep their housing stability. And it's important that we help them build connections among other residents to strengthen the community. One way we're doing this is by focusing more on resident communication. As the new owner and manager of NOAA properties, there are a number of things we do. We introduce ourselves with a welcome packet delivered to every resident's door. These include our shared promises, what they can expect of us and what we expect of them. And it's a tool for them to reach out if they feel like we aren't upholding our promises. We also include a packet with community resources. We hold open house events for residents to meet new staff and each other. We establish relationships with local officials, police, and community organizations. We hold regular resident meetings and we give residents updates about improvements we're working on. We make immediate health and safety improvements and work to find additional funding to upgrade and maintain the property for the long term. We work with residents who aren't respecting their neighbors or respecting the property. If they can't be good neighbors, they can't stay in our community. We work to learn about our residents to figure out what services or other support may help them maintain housing stability. We will continue to learn and adjust our approach as we acquire more properties, as we help make home possible for more people in our community. It's critical that we move quickly. The window of opportunity to save NOAA homes in our region is closing. In fact, in the past 2 months, Aeon has acquired more than 1,100 NOAA homes. You made it possible for us to take quick action to save these affordable apartments. Aeon is really just a tool, though, for you to make our community stronger. I want to reflect for a moment on your impact. Your investment in Aeon has saved nearly 3,000 NOAA apartment homes over the past several years. Because of you, these properties have a chance to stay affordable for the long term. They remain home for the children, families, and seniors who live there. Saving NOAA homes is just one part of your impact. Your support also helps build new affordable homes and maintain the homes already in Aeon's portfolio. More than 5,600 quality affordable homes exist in the Twin Cities because of you. And nearly 12,000 people have a home with Aeon each year. That is absolutely incredible. And it's thanks to you. Your support made this happen. Aeon residents, children, families, veterans, seniors, formerly homeless people, all thank you. I'm grateful that you'll be with us, making even more impact in the future. Together, we will fight for the quality homes families can afford. There's truly no way to fully express what your support and investment means to me, and especially to our residents. But I hope today you've gotten a closer look at how your support has helped save homes and continues to change lives every day. Now, I'd like to answer some of your questions. Let's see here. We have one question. How does Aeon find out about NOAA properties that are available? Well, actually, a few years ago, we basically relied on, when we started this, we relied on just looking at the brokers' websites. But since we bought quite a few homes in the first couple of years of doing this, we now have brokers approach us. We're one of the first organizations brokers approach. Sometimes sellers now know about us, that we're in the buying mode, and sellers approach us privately. And thirdly, communities themselves sometimes reach out to us and say, "Hey, we think this property is going to be lost." I'll tell you a story about that. In the city of Richfield in 2017, I got a phone call one Friday afternoon from a city council person who said, "I understand you guys, the folks who can help save this apartment complex that we think is going to be lost in the city of Richfield as affordable housing. And we fear that all 422 families are going to be kicked out." And I asked, "So what's the situation? Is there a purchase agreement on it by somebody else?" And the answer was, "We don't know, but we've heard through the grapevine that it's going to be sold." And I said, "Well, if there's a purchase agreement, we probably can't do anything. Let me check." We checked in the ownership of the property. It was an owner investment firm from Denver, Colorado. Through some strange serendipity, I happened to know the CFO of that firm in Colorado, and I called, and he was on vacation. He said, "I'll call you back in 2 weeks." I said, "You can't. You have to sell us this property, and you have to talk to me now." Long story short, I was flying to also on vacation. I was in London, and he was in California on vacation. We had back and forth email conversations for 3 days until he finally agreed that they would sell the property to us. And by Wednesday of the following week, we had a purchase agreement in place. This property was really days away from being lost as affordable. 422 apartment homes for people. So these come to us in many, many ways, and sometimes interesting ways. And increasingly, folks understand that we're in the business of trying to save affordable housing. Let's see, we have another question here. How do we pay for NOAA properties? Where does the money come from? Well, we underwrite these things in several ways, but the permanent financing usually looks something like this. Freddie Mac, major mortgage provider for multifamily housing, or Fannie Mae, or sometimes FHA, which is basically the federal government, provides about 70%, sometimes as much as 80% in a first mortgage at a fairly low interest rate. And the rest of the money, the 20 or 30, usually typically somewhere around 30, sometimes 35% of the total is equity. Where's that equity come from? So we've been spending that last 5 years building partnerships with 5 equity partners who require lower return rates than the typical private real estate marketplace investor would. That allows us to compete with the private marketplace. The other thing that allows us to compete is that we get a tax break if we keep the housing more affordable than 60% AMI. So 60% AMI or less, that would be for a family of 4, somewhere around $1,200 or less a month in rent. So we basically are using a combination of lower priced equity and typical marketplace first mortgages to purchase these properties. Who are we competing with to buy these properties? Well, it's from investors from across the country and locally, both. We recently bid on a set of property in the city of Wayzata. We were one of 40 bidders. That property, we finished second in the bidding. That means those 107 households will almost surely lose their housing. So we're competing with a wide range of folks, typically not other nonprofits, typically not other organizations trying to save NOAA housing. So if we don't buy it basically right now, it most likely will be lost as affordable. A couple of years ago, we stepped into a property in the city of St. Paul where 99 seniors were about ready to be kicked out of their housing. So it's really important for us to be extremely active. I've been asked whether or not it's good for us to be so aggressive, so assertive in this marketplace. Shouldn't we slow down? And I look at people when they ask me that, and I say, well, this week, another 100 units will come to us, and we'll have the option of saying yes or no. And if we say no, 100 families will lose their home. What do you want to do? Let's see, other questions are coming in. Does Aeon have the right people to do this work? I think that sounds like a question about capacity. Capacity, when you're in a growth mode, and we are, is really about three major things. Number one, people. Do we have the right people, which is the specific question asked? And do we have enough people? We've been working really hard on that, and we think we do. I'm really excited to announce that starting Monday, Sarah Harris, who's a very well-known person in the real estate and community leadership arena in the Twin Cities, Sarah will begin her work as our new Executive Vice President of Strategy, Partnerships, and Production. So she'll be tasked in part to continue the production and the preservation of NOAA housing that we've been doing. The other two pieces about capacity are about capital. Do we have access to the right amount of capital? I believe that if we have certainly increased our access to capital, but we need to do that even greater. If we're going to be the player and have the positive impact that I think we can have as a great tool for the communities, then if we have access to 4 times as much capital, we'll do 4 times as much production and preservation of affordable housing. And finally, systems make a big difference from a capacity standpoint, and that breaks down into 2 areas: people systems and technology systems. And we've been working for 5 years to improve those. Every day, really, we're changing some piece of some system, whether it's in our HR arena or IT arena, or even systems around our housing development and production. So we continue to do that, and you help us do that. So there's cost to that, and we continue to fight hard to maintain our capacity so we can do even more for the community. Who are you competing with? I think I've answered that question. To buy these NOAA properties, it's primarily private investors who look to get into the properties, spiff them up a little bit, and raise rents $200, $300, $400, in some cases $500 and $600 a month. I think it was 61 or was it 81 seniors were kicked out in the city of Edina not too long ago because their rents were going to go up on average of $600 per month. What kind of financial support does Aeon need to succeed at NOAA properties once we've closed? Very good question. Well, we need, in some cases, funds, resources for social support services so that we can build strong, stable communities. Not all of our residents have need for support, but many of them do. We need funding for physical repairs and improvements to the property to make the home safe and functional for the long term. We need funding for additional staff, things like computer systems and other resources to equip us as we increase the number of homes we manage overall and the number of homes we maintain. Let's see, question. Will the development of more market rate housing create more naturally occurring affordable housing? I get this question a lot. As a matter of fact, there's a group of folks out there proposing if we just build more housing in general, eventually some of it will wear out and there'll be some units that are affordable. Well, first of all, that assumes that the marketplace is so stupid it will overbuild housing to such an extent that in 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, we'll have more housing than we need. The other variable to that, of course, is whether or not our population of certain age groups goes up or down. I'm not willing, maybe you are, I'm not willing to wait 20 or 30 years to see if we overbuilt housing 20 years before or 30 years before. So no, building more market rate housing is going to have a negligible effect in the short term to create more naturally occurring affordable housing. It's it's really an excuse in some ways by some people to encourage public support of market rate housing. What is the most cost-effective investment we can make in affordable housing? Another really good question. For 25 years, Aeon and others in the community have been saying that the most cost-effective thing to do is to buy used housing, existing housing. Housing has been around for a while, and transform it into affordable, decent, affordable places for people to call home. That advice has not always been taken, but now hopefully we're getting some purchase, some support to do exactly that. To do a NOAA property, the prices in today's marketplace range. Well, again, these are properties that are usually in sometimes fair condition, sometimes bad condition. The prices range, depending on location, anywhere from between $75,000 per unit to upwards of even as much as $140,000 per unit. And it's still half the price of new construction. So to build a new construction unit costs somewhere about between 275 and 325,000 per unit, depending on the size of the unit and a number of other variables. So no question, the most cost-effective investment we can make is preserving the housing we have and keeping it affordable. Next question, what happens to the people who are already living in the properties we buy? Well, if they're doing the things that they're supposed to do to be a good neighbor, and not everybody is often. We stepped into a property the other day that had 3,000 police calls in 2018. But if people are doing what they're supposed to do, we will keep the rents somewhere around where they are when we step into them. Sometimes we raise them slightly, maybe $25 or $50, so that we can finance the property. We have to balance a number of different things. The private marketplace, again, as I said before, would maybe raise the rents $200, $300, $400. But if they're good residents and good neighbors, then they can continue to live there at an affordable a rent as we can maintain and still run the property responsibly. Again, there are some folks that we request to leave because they're not doing the things that they need to do to be a good neighbor, a good resident, a good community member. Next question, how does my gift help with Noah's work? Well, that might take me a day to answer. But your gift supports our ability to act and act quickly. We have in most of these cases somewhere between as little as 45 days, sometimes 120 days to close. So these deals require a very quick response. Your gift also enables the critical work that happens before a deal closes. In other words, supporting our capacity, making sure we have those staff and make sure we're doing the things we need to do to encourage really good people to work at Aeon, create incentives for them to stay at Aeon, keep our lights on, keep almost 12,000 people's lights on. You know, I often use the analogy of a bicycle. From a distance, people might say, what does my $1,000 do? What does my $2,000 do? Really? These are expensive things you are working on. So it seems insignificant in the overall scope of things. But no, from a distance, a bicycle looks like a bicycle. But as you get closer to it, if there's a pedal missing, it doesn't ride. If there's a seat missing, it doesn't ride. And so what your contribution does, what your support does, is make this complete bicycle so it rides like the wind. So it's very important for all of our supporters to continue to help us do what we do. Let's see, rent control. How might that impact affordable housing? Well, rent control is a extremely complicated issue. Rent control is when the government is typically when a government puts rent ceiling in place or some kind of limits on how much people can increase rents. There are a variety of perspectives about how rent control affects the marketplace. There's no question in the short term, freezing prices would help people who don't have enough money to pay rent. In the long term, it also creates some disincentives for capital to flow to those parts of the marketplace. I'm often asked about what's wrong with capitalism. And my answer often is there's really nothing wrong with capitalism. It's an incentive-based economic system. What we have today, though, is not just capitalism. What we have today is capitalism run amok, capitalism unfettered, capitalism that's really greed. And so somewhere along the line, we have to get to a place where we understand that we're all in this together. And if we are all not be able to live and have a place to live and have decent food and decent health care, our community ultimately is not going to work and it's not going to succeed as a whole. So I think we need to understand how affordable housing is related to our economic system and the way we use our economic system in our communities. Next question. Older buildings are often run down and need repairs, but a lot of them are still charging high prices. Will that ever change? No, I don't think so. I think as long as the demand is there, and right now we have a very hot market. The state of Minnesota demographer projects that we're going to add 800,000 people to our state in fairly short order. That probably translates to maybe 350,000 jobs. And about half the jobs, as I said earlier, are paying wages that would qualify people for affordable housing. We already have over 200,000 people who are paying more than they can afford in rent. You add that 150,000 or whatever it ends up being to that 200,000, it doesn't bode well for our future, and is one of the reasons I say we're facing the worst housing problem since the Great Depression in the 1930s. So yes, they can charge high prices when there's a tremendous demand, as long as people think that the Twin Cities and the state of Minnesota is a good place to live. And of course, I think it is. Then that demand will be strong, and people will be able to sell their apartments for more money than people can afford. I have a question here that says, what can you tell us about our new acquisitions at Aeon? Well, on December 27th, we acquired Village Club, a 306 apartment property in Bloomington, 1 block south of Mall of America. You can understand how that might be a very attractive site and how we had to bid very aggressively to get a chance to acquire that property. It's an interesting property. First of all, from a historical standpoint, it was built in 1969 and for many years was the home of Vikings players whose football field was only a couple blocks away on what is now the site for the Mall of America. But it's a very structurally a very nice property. It's been woefully taken care of for many, many years. When we took it over, it had an exterior door, not just wasn't working, it was ripped off and gone. That's right. Ripped off and gone. And it has had many other problems. We're straightening those out. We won't straighten them out in a month or 2 or 3. It'll take time. We've certainly worked with the city of Bloomington. The city of Bloomington has been a great partner in that project, in that property, acquiring it. The Local Initiative Support Corporation, which is a national organization out of New York, also helped us acquire that. And the National Equity Fund out of Chicago helped us acquire that property. It has a giant parking lot, and we plan to build another 165 units for large families on that site, 2 and 3, 4 bedrooms, which are desperately needed in our communities. So when we're done in 3 years, fixing the existing 306 units as well as building the new 165, it'll be about a 500 unit complex, really, a block from the Mall of America, where there's 11,000 jobs, and 1.5 blocks from the Mall of America Transit Hub, which is one of the best transit hubs, of course, most busy and useful transit hubs in the Twin Cities. So it's a tremendous acquisition for folks who are looking for home. It's an interesting thing about that site is that a lot of the current residents don't have a car because they are so close to that transit hub. And they can get to their jobs, whether their job is in downtown St. Paul or downtown Minneapolis or at the Mall of America itself or in a number of other places throughout our communities. The second big acquisition we've made in the last couple of months is Huntington Place in the city of Brooklyn Park. Huntington Place is kind of a notorious property, has 834 one-bedroom units, and that's the property I cited earlier that had over 3,000 police calls in 2018. It also was in fairly bad shape, not as bad a shape as Village Club though. And it has some social issues as well as some design issues that we need to address. And maybe we'll do a special program on how design affects affordable housing, how design affects all of us actually in our built environment, and how we design things make a difference in how we act and react within the built environment. But Huntington Place, we've told the city of Brooklyn Park, which was also a great partner in acquiring that property, along with the local Initiative Support Corporation and the National Equity Fund out of Chicago. We've told the city of Brooklyn Park that that property is going to take us 5 years to fully get to a place where everybody's really super proud and looks back and says, look what we did here. Now, we've already made great strides in our relationships with our residents at both these properties, but it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. Excuse me. Got another question. We understand that there are a variety of resident needs, but often they're siloed and residents get to run around. No kidding. Yeah, that's not the question. That's my response. If you could create co-located resources for Aeon residents, what would you want in that mix? That's a really good question too. We're being pushed by some of the folks who helped us with both these acquisitions, for example. So what supportive services are going to be supplied or provided at these properties? And they're not always happy when we answer, we don't know. You have to remember when we step into these properties, we don't know the residents yet. Oh, we have impressions from other people. We have some data. We have projections from people who have different perspectives about poor people and for that matter, be honest, people of color. But we really don't know our residents when we first step into these properties. And we can't know them in the first 2 weeks or 4 weeks or even 3 or 4 months. So one of the things we're doing and always will do is to get to know our residents. So engage with them in a variety of ways, both individually as well as collectively, throwing gatherings to get, first of all, the neighbors to know each other, and then just listen, really. Take a look at the data we have from service agencies that already serve these properties, of course, but dig in deeper so that we really know what the needs of the residents are. Now, having said that, we've done this long enough to know that in general, one of the biggest challenges we have in our communities is mental health. Almost all the other problems are tinged with challenges around mental health. Some of our properties have the number of residents that need as many as 80%. As many as 80% of the residents have some kind of mental health problems. Now, again, we have some properties that serve homeless people, and if you're homeless for very long, you're going to have some mental health issues. If you're surviving on the streets by selling your body or digging in dumpsters to eat, you're going to have some mental health problems. If you've become homeless because you've been beat by your spouse repeatedly for 3 or 4 years, you're going to have some mental health problems. So mental health is probably the number one challenge that our residents have, and we certainly are already talking to several different agencies and others who can provide services at both these properties we just took over to deal with those mental health issues. But we really don't know what the long-term needs are. We know that in some of these properties, they have enough children, that having after-school opportunities for children will be a real big positive. And we're working with some agencies in town to try to create after-school programs and partnerships. So those are the kind of resources that we are pretty sure are going to be there, but we still have some work to do to finalize that for these last two properties for sure. Let's see. Another question. Do you think the 2040 plan, that would be the Minneapolis 2040 plan, will help create more affordable housing in our community? And what about concerns that will change the community's character? Well, that's a really good question. I get asked that question a lot too, because there was so much angst about the Minneapolis 2040 plan. And my common response is it was much ado about nothing. And by the way, from both sides, those who think the 2040 plan would create communities and neighborhoods that are going to be terrible in some way, I think haven't really spent much time looking at some of the best neighborhoods in the world. Some of the best neighborhoods in the world where people really want to desperately live have characteristics that look very much like what the Minneapolis 2040 plan proposes. Secondly, those who think that building auxiliary units and a little bit more density in some of our best neighborhoods in the community is going to create affordable housing are also mistaken. Those additional units created will rent at prices that they can get in really good marketplaces, in really good neighborhoods. So it won't be affordable. It will be just as unaffordable as the housing that is currently there now in many cases. So I think it'll have a negligible effect on affordable housing, and it won't make much difference in changing great neighborhoods. I think they'll actually be better neighborhoods. We have a question here. How do we think, or how do I think, inclusionary zoning will impact naturally occurring affordable housing or affordable housing in general? Well, it's related to the previous question. So inclusionary zoning is first of all, there's several different permutations of the inclusionary zoning policies, but basically it's demanding or requiring developers to include affordable housing or some element or amount of affordable housing in their development projects. And it is one aspect of the Minneapolis 2040 plan as well. So there is this goal to somehow stick affordable housing units into, for example, a multifamily building that's owned by for-profit. Now, a lot of for-profit developers are good friends of mine and good people, but the reality of the for-profit world is that the goal is to make as much financial return as reasonably possible. Even though the current owner might be perfectly fine to stick 15 or 20 affordable units in that building, long term, I think the prospects for it to stay affordable are very low. There will always, no matter what the current city council in any city puts in place for requirements for the extended use of affordability, long term, at least based on where we are politically and socially in today's world, long term, I think the prospects of those units staying affordable is low. However, that doesn't mean I don't think that developers have a responsibility to help provide affordable housing. I think they should. And whether that means that they contribute funds to a pool, for example, some percentage of funds to a pool every time they build 100 units, or whether or not maybe there's a right to purchase the housing by a nonprofit or by the community in some way to keep it affordable long term, first right of refusal, or some other tool that I don't even know about, then I think in that case, inclusionary zoning is one of the tools in our toolbox that we could use to fix the problem that we're facing over the next 20 years or so. Next question, how does Aeon balance saving as many homes as possible with making sure that they're quality? That is also a very good and challenging question. So when we went down this path in 2016 to be active in the NOAA acquisition arena, we told our board of directors, we want to be clear, there's no way that we're adding 3,000 units to our portfolio without at least a little bit of hit in our ability to provide quality. There's two reasons for that. You can't focus on two things at once. It's hard as a human being or as an institution and as an organization. Secondly, a lot of these properties we're buying are not in very good shape, and we're not going to snap our fingers the day after we buy them and make them be in good shape. So there's a timing issue there. We do have trust that the community will come to the table as our partners to with capital and other assistance to help us improve these properties over the long term. But again, that takes time. Just like we told the city of Brooklyn Park that it would be a 5-year path to get it where it needs to be. That's true for all these NOAAs that we're purchasing. Some are worse than others, but we do want to certainly start managing them better, start treating residents with respect, start at least fixing the current maintenance issues that arrive. We want to make sure that all serious health and safety problems are taken care of. And as a matter of fact, we don't close on these properties unless the serious health and safety problems are part of the initial underwriting for our acquisition. Even if it's interim underwriting, interim acquisition funds, we wouldn't even purchase one unless we could take care of those things immediately. But long term, it takes us time. So there's no question that our quality has fallen a little bit at Aeon, but we think it's important to act quickly. To say we need perfect places, but it's okay to put 400 people out in the street, and that's not the way we look at it. So one of the important aspects of that is it's important that we communicate that to residents, because residents sometimes occasionally see us as riding in on a white horse to save the day, and we can't say that day immediately. We might say that day long run in the long run, but not immediately. So we have to communicate to our residents, to the cities, and to our other partners to know exactly what to expect, and that's what we try to do as much as we can. Sometimes they don't hear us, but we try to communicate that clearly. I get a question here that says, you say that the window to buy NOAA properties is closing. Why? Well, the prices when we started this for NOAA properties were somewhere between $60,000 per unit and $90,000 per unit, depending on the location and other aspects, other variables. Now, the average price of this kind of housing, I think last year in 2019 was closer to 105, 110,000 per unit, and it ranges as high as $145,000 a unit. Most of these NOAAs, back when we started down this initiative of acquiring and saving NOAA housing, most of it was serving households with incomes between about 40% area median income and 55% area median income. So when the cost of the acquisition continually goes up, that means the cost of our mortgage, the cost of our equity money that we have to use to acquire it goes up. And if those costs go up, then the cost of the rent has to go up. Either that or we need to find money that has no return expectations. First mortgages require us to pay them every month. The equity folks who, even though their equity might be lower priced than the market, still require us to provide a return on their equity. So one of the things that we are doing right now is to work with the state of Minnesota and the legislature, some representatives, to put in place some funding that will help us fill the gap for those NOAAs that are slightly higher priced, then will allow us to keep it affordable. So the higher the price of these properties is to buy, the harder it is for us to finance them and keep the rents affordable. Let's see. We have a question here. What is the most cost-effective investment we can make in affordable housing? I've already answered that one, I think. How does mine get? Let's see. Well, the development. Here's one. Where do people go when their homes are sold out from under them? A very good question. As I said in the story before I told, there's a woman that we know pretty well, was kicked out of one NOAA property because it was bought and the rents went up too high for her to afford, went to another NOAA property, and a year or so later was kicked out of that property because it was bought and spruced up a little and the rents went too high for her to afford. Well, ultimately, they're going to go to the streets. Right now, they're being shuffled around to different NOAA properties. Right now, the percentage of their income they pay for their rents, maybe they were 40% of their income and now they're 45, and next year it'll be 50% of their income, and the year after that it'll be 55%, and then at some point they won't be able to afford that. And where they go, they will be homeless, which is why I predict that homelessness is going to double in the Twin Cities in fairly short order. I suppose there are many variables to that. We could raise people's incomes. We could raise minimum wage to $20 an hour, for example. That'd make a huge difference. I don't foresee that happening in the near future. We've been arguing over $15 an hour, and I see on McDonald's signs now hiring $15 an hour, and we're arguing over $15 by 2022. That makes no sense whatsoever. So I don't see that changing tomorrow. So if there isn't some major change in the way our economy runs for poorer people, then they're going to be homeless. NOAA properties, these NOAA properties that we're saving are the last rung on the ladder before these families descend into homelessness. Okay, let's see, is a question. You've been with Aeon for a while. What's different about your work now versus 30 years ago? Sure, there's some aspects differently. Being the CEO of an organization that has 216 staff is different than being the CEO of an organization that has 2.5 staff. But I don't think it's fundamentally different. I think it's my job as CEO is to articulate the need, to communicate what Aeon is trying to do about it, to motivate our staff, to help our staff and board create relationships and positive credibility in the community so we can do more. I think that's what I certainly personally have tried to do from the beginning, and I think that's still my job, basically. I just have a few more people to reach out to and have a lot more great people to help do it. Next question, what do we need to ask policymakers to do to fight the affordable housing crisis? Well, I laugh ruefully when I see some mayor or some legislator pat themselves on the back with putting $50 million into an affordable housing fund or proposing a $50 million affordable housing initiative. A couple of years ago, the previous governor of the state of Minnesota put together an affordable housing and homeless task force. 35 smart people from around the state gathered to come up with recommendations. When the recommendations came out, I was asked by a reporter, what do you think of those recommendations? And I said, yeah, they all make reasonable sense, but there's one major thing missing from the recommendations. Nowhere in the set of recommendations did it talk about money, capital, resources. Well, I think it mentioned the word resources several times, like we're going to need resources to make this happen. But there were no specific numbers. I asked a number of the task force members, why didn't you guys mention the scale of the need, the scale of the problem we have? And the answer I got back from a couple was that we were afraid it would scare people. You may know the author James Baldwin. He has a quote that I often use, which is, not every problem that is faced can be changed, but no problem can be changed unless it is faced. So we have to be realistic about what it's going to take. My quick back of the envelope calculation says we need $5 billion to solve this problem long term. Now, it can come in many ways. It doesn't have to be cold, hard cash. Again, it's an economic problem. But $5 billion over the course of the next, I don't know, 5 or 10 years is going to be needed to truly solve the problem. Or we can just make the decision that we're going to be stepping over the bodies of 75-year-old homeless persons in the doorways of our businesses when we come to work in the morning. Is that a crazy prediction? No. Go to San Francisco. Get up in the morning for your morning run. Go to LA. Do your morning walk at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. Go to Portland, Seattle. They didn't have that problem 10, 12 years ago. Now they do. So we get to decide, what do we want? What kind of community do we want to be? Who are we as a people? I hope we choose well. What can we expect to see? Next question. What can we expect to see from Aeon in 2020? Well, so in the last 5 years, I said we've been, producing 500, 700 units a year and, adding to our portfolio, some new construction, of course, through the tax credit program. And again, the majority through acquisition of NOAA housing. I think in 2020, we still expect to acquire another 400 to 600 units of affordable NOAA housing and, form new partnerships with new folks with capital. We're trying to get people to understand that the fixed income portion of their investment portfolios, whether an institutional investor or an individual investor, that 30% of their investment portfolio that they're getting 1.5% or 2% return on, they can double the return if they invest in us and our work and make a major impact in the community. It's not quite how people think of their investments, but we're happy to talk to them about why we think it makes sense for them. So these new relationships, these new collaborations, we think can lead to us to even do more in the future than we've done in the past 5 years. So we're excited about the future, looking very much forward to what it brings, looking very much forward to the partnerships and relationships and the donor relationships we have with many of you, so we can do more. Next question. Are there certain parts of the Twin Cities that have more NOAA properties? A very good question. Are there certain parts of the Twin Cities that will be hurt more if we lose NOAA? Good question as well. So yeah, there are some parts of the communities that have NOAA. For example, the city of Minneapolis has very few large NOAA properties. A lot of the city of Minneapolis has these 24, 26, and 30 unit multifamily properties. They're kind of hard to buy and run efficiently. We have done it. We bought 220 units in the city of Minneapolis and I think 11 in the city of Edina about a year and a half ago. But they're hard to buy and hard to run efficiently. So it's going to be hard for us to do much more NOAA in the city of Minneapolis. The city of St. Paul, on the other hand, has a large number of NOAA properties in the Highland Park area and along 7th Street, West 7th Street, as well as on the northeast quadrant of the city of St. Paul. A lot of larger properties built in the 60s, 70s, early 80s. So we certainly are looking at those locations. I think all parts of our community will be hurt by the loss of NOAA. A lot of the communities that there are many NOAAs in are the inner ring suburbs and second ring suburbs. Again, these are suburban communities that were built up in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. And a good chunk of what was built was larger apartment buildings. And so there are a lot of opportunities still for us to help cities like Brooklyn Park and Bloomington to save affordable housing in their community. Who are NOAA residents? Very good question. I don't think we have a full picture of that yet. Even though we've been doing this for 5 years, we don't really know all the demographics. We certainly don't know the recent ones, as I said earlier, about who lives in our properties, but most of them are working minimum wage jobs, slightly above minimum wage jobs, working those service jobs that don't pay much in our communities. In many of the NOAA properties we're buying, they are overloaded with people. We'll have 1-bedroom units with 4, 5, 6 people living there because they can't afford to be elsewhere. And these are folks who are just trying to live successfully. And I think we're in the process of developing more demographics and a better understanding of our residents really throughout our properties, not just our NOAA properties. So stay tuned for more detail about that, probably the next 6 months. Let's see, next question. What can we learn from places like San Francisco as we fight the housing crisis in the Twin Cities? Do something. Don't wait. Don't sit and watch. Act. Plan a little. Do a lot. Trust that the community will come to the table. As I often say, again, it's not Aeon that does this. We're the tool. We're the tool for the community. If the community doesn't come to the table, whether it's the state finance agency or the counties or the cities or the foundations, if they don't come to the table, in 5 years, we'll have to raise rents $300 a month too, because we're not going to run slum properties. We need your support. We need your support. We need you stomping and yelling to get the support from our public agencies and our communities writ large to help us do this work. So thank you for that. And I think that's the number one lesson from the places like San Francisco. Okay, let's see. I think those are all the questions. Looking down my list here, coming in. Yeah, those are all the questions. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you've learned a little bit more about the impact of your support and the urgency of this work in our communities. Have a great evening. Thank you so much.